If you have your Bibles or cell phones, if you turn with me to the book of Daniel, the Old Testament book of Daniel, it comes after Ezekiel, it comes after Lamentations, Ezekiel, and then comes Daniel. So it's way past Psalms, it's way past Proverbs, it's in the prophets, the book of Daniel. It comes before Hosea, the book of Daniel, after Ezekiel, after Lamentations, the book of Daniel, chapter 1. So if you go to, there are some recovery groups. There are recovery groups like self-help groups for people who struggle with alcohol and addiction and drug addiction. There are these recovery groups. They even meet all over the city of Bangalore. They're secular groups. But the people who founded these groups, two doctors, or at least one of them was a doctor, and I don't know about the other guy, Dr. Bill and Bob. These two guys founded it in the 1950s. And it's a self-help group where people come and they share their struggles. It's anonymous, so confidentiality is maintained. Now, when you come to one of these groups, you know how they identify themselves. They'll say their name, and then they'll say, I'm an alcoholic. They'll say, I'm an addict. So that's their identity. So even though most of them, see, I know the rules of that, because if you come, supposing you come after having a drink, the only rule is you're not supposed to talk. You can come and sit there. So it's a very free group, a very open group and all that. Happens all over. There's a Christian version also of this group called Celebrate Recovery, pioneered by Rick Warren, Saddleback Church in California. So it's 12 steps. These people, Dr. Bill, Dr. Bob, they took those 12 steps from the Bible. But as with all recovery programs, you can always find some sort of criticism. One of the things that I find that's missing in this recovery group for Christians is the cross. Okay, there's no mention of the cross, no mention of Jesus dying and all that. So I think that's a big drawback of this program, the 12-step program. But most of the principles are from the Bible. However, this identity thing which I just mentioned, you come and say, so you insert your name and then you say, I'm an alcoholic. It's always debatable. When initially I thought that's a good thing, because it is just my thought process over the years. Initially I thought it's a good thing, for an alcoholic to know that that's where he comes from. It's a good reminder. Otherwise he might quickly forget and he might quickly return to his old ways, or an addict or whatever. But then as I used to talk with Pastor Vasu about this very thing, some of you know Pastor Vasu, he says, I don't like that. And over the years I've begun to agree with him. He says, I don't like to identify, not he, but those people. He says it's not healthy for them to identify as an alcoholic or an addict, because they keep on declaring it over themselves. I'm not word of faith or anything like that, but it's not good to keep on associating even with your past, because God has washed you clean from the past. So now your new identity is you should come and say, I'm a child of God, I'm forgiven, I've been healed from my past. You shouldn't keep on identifying and saying, so now I agree more on this side, saying that you should not, that's my past, or that's your past, and we all have different things. In Paul, he names this long list of sins in 1 Corinthians 6, and he says, such were some of you. Homosexuality, adultery, fornication, robbing, thievery, whatever it is, such were some of you. And so I kind of agree with Pastor Vasu, and I think that our identity has been changed. I want us to turn to the book of John, the Gospel of John, and just look at two verses. There's something that Jesus said. The Gospel of John, chapter 15. Somebody read for me verses 18 and 19, something that Jesus is telling his disciples. John chapter 15, verses 18 and 19, if somebody could read for me.
If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I choose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you.
Okay, thank you, Leah. So, just a reminder, sometimes we forget that the world hated Jesus. Many of the people who watched and saw the things that Jesus did actually didn't agree with him. He had a very few followers. There's one sad chapter, John chapter 6, it says, many found what he was saying very hard and they left him, they deserted him. So many of his followers who were initially following him and were caught up in all the frenzy, all the action, later on they deserted him, later on they left him. And Jesus tells his disciples, if the world hated me and I'm the leader of this movement, I'm beginning the church, how much more will they hate you? They hate me, they're going to hate you. So I'm just reminding each one of us that being hated by the world is not necessarily a bad thing. It could be a good thing also. If they find you weird, they say, why are you like this? It's okay if they hate on you also. They hated on Jesus, they hated on the disciples. So, coming back to that introduction in the recovery meeting, if we as Christians were to introduce ourselves, if we're sitting in a 12-step meeting or something similar to that, if we are to introduce ourselves, you can say your name and you can say, I am so and so, insert your name. I am Abhishek and I'm a non-conformist. I don't conform to the patterns of this world. I can identify as somebody who does not conform to the patterns of this world, because we have a new identity. Apostle Paul says, 2 Corinthians 5:17, we're all a new creation. We're new in Christ. The old is gone, the old has passed away. Romans 12:2 also, you'll remember, it says, do not conform to the patterns of this world. So we're all non-conformists in that sense, and it's okay if the world hates us. But I don't know if you, when you were growing up, tried to do something to stand out. You didn't want to blend into the crowd. I remember a couple of things that I did when I was young. I thought that plasters were cool, like wearing plasters on the fingers when I was in 7th, 8th standard. So Clarence High School, I would go to the medical shop, I'd buy 5-6 plasters and I'd put it on each finger and I'd go to school the next day. And sometimes, once or twice it happened, where the teacher asked, what happened to that? And I didn't want to tell the teacher that I'm wasting plasters. So I said, I fell and I scraped my hand. But then the funny part is, like, what happens when the plaster gets old? Next day you come, there are no scars to show. But anyway, so I wanted to stand out. I probably saw some rapper do it or something back in the day. In the 90s, a lot of rappers used to wear bandages on their hands and all that. So I thought I want to stand out. Another trend, I remember one of my friends came from South Africa. This was when I was 15, 16, around that age. You would wear these nice shades. Okay, it wasn't like the Ray-Bans and all. Very stylish, very trendy shades you'd wear it. But you would not wear it only for the sun. You'd wear it inside the mall, inside people's houses. Everywhere you'd have his shades on. So I thought that was a very cool trend to follow, and I also began. I began telling people, like, people asked, what no sun you're wearing? I said, who's wearing for the sun? I'm wearing for style and all that. Because I want to be somebody who does not conform to the, I want to stand out. I don't want to blend in. Hair gel is another thing, but many of you might have gone through that phase where you put hair gel. I used to ask my dad, beg my dad to bring me like bottles and bottles of hair gel. The harder the better, the more harder it makes your hair, the better. And you spike up. Spike was one trend, but also like 100 hair, together, because that's how hard, so it'll all be, and you can see your scalp right through. So that was one trend in school that we used to do. Full of gel, we used to put whose hair is harder, we used to check and touch and see. So these kind of things, right? We want to stand out. Now, as Christians, many of us are content to go with the status quo of the day, where we don't want to stand out, we don't want to be set apart. We're like, everybody's doing. What is status quo? It's basically like, that's the way it is. Have you ever heard somebody say that? Oh, that's just the way it is. That's the way things are. That's the way things have been. That's the way things always will be. We don't want to stand out. And the catchphrase for Daniel, to describe Daniel, is dare to be a Daniel, right? Because he stood out. And so we're looking at this one character who probably was, scholars say, and I think it's very credible, when he was taken into captivity, he was between the age of 15 and 17. He was a young guy. He wasn't like 30-year-old mature Christian in the Lord. He was a young guy, and he wants to be different. So my question this evening is there a holy defiance in our lives when it comes to the world and the standards that the world sets, the trends that the world sets, the status quo? We do this, whether it's laughing at certain jokes that are inappropriate, whatever you think that will categorize you as the world, and you're scared to be left out. So let's take a look at the life of Daniel, because his life helps us recalibrate our moral compass. Sometimes we need a realignment. Sometimes our moral compass it's a little bit off. And so we need to recalibrate, and I think Daniel, looking at his life, his character helps us do that. So Daniel did not have FOMO. I know FOMO is a little bit old now, YOLO and all, it's a little bit old, or been years now since people have been using that. But he didn't have the fear of missing out. He didn't think like, one life I need to indulge. If I miss out, then I'll never get to indulge in the pleasures of the world. I'll never get to be a hedonist. Hedonism is basically pleasure seeking, pursuit of pleasure. My pleasure is my highest aim or good. So Daniel didn't worry about that. And my question is, you turn that FOMO concept on its head. And you think, if if I'm indulging in the world, what about the FOMO when it comes to God? What about the fear of missing out when it comes to God and His best for my life? If I'm indulging in the world and blending in and going to certain places where all my friends are, because that's how it's always been, all those kind of things. What about missing out on what God has for me? We have to be very clear to draw the line like Daniel did. So let's look at Daniel chapter 1. Verses 1 and 2 I'll read first. Okay. And the first thing that I want to share with you, the first point or truth is, expect the unexpected. That is verses 1 and 2. Daniel chapter 1 verses 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, if you cannot pronounce that name, Nebuchadnezzar, you can remember Nebu had a razor. Okay, Nebu had a razor. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Okay, so first thing over here, if you read that, it sounds like secular history, and that's exactly what it is. In the year, the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the 3rd year it says. So all second, it reads like a history textbook. That's from the point of secular history. Now read verse 2. It says, "And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God." So, one is secular history. But number 2 is from God's vantage. From his viewpoint, he's describing the same thing that's happening. But one is how the world sees it. Number 2 is how God sees it. And that's exactly how it is. Everything in our life, even those things that are unexpected, those things that you're a little bit, you're caught off guard, you're surprised, you're wondering why God allowed this in my life. There are 2 things, the way the world sees it, whatever's happened to you. Sometimes it's the way we see it, because we see as the world sees. But we ought to stand up, because God sees it differently. Now, I like what John Nelson Darby said. And listen to this carefully. He says, God's ways are often behind the scenes, but he moves all the scenes that he is behind. God's ways are often behind the scenes, but he moves all the scenes that he is behind. It's talking about the sovereignty of God, the fact that he controls the outcome, he controls. So there are things in your life and my life that we question, because the world will set one standard. They think if everything in your life is going well, according to plan, smooth sailing, you're a blessed man, God is good to you and all that. But if something is you're a cursed man. That's how the world looks at it. But here, Daniel, if you look, there are 2 verses, and you place them together, you juxtapose them, and you look at them side by side. It's describing the same event in 2 different viewpoints or perspectives. So, Nebu thinks he's in control. Okay, he thinks like he's come and he's taken everybody captive and all that. But if you read verse 2, it says God is the one who gave Jehoiakim, probably a very wicked king, into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. So don't go into sometimes when something happens, and it happens to me often. Sometimes when something happens, you sort of go into a shell, you something bad happened, I'll never do this again. And sometimes it's quite ridiculous. Like, for example, I'm just thinking of this on the spot as I said it. This afternoon, I'm on some group chats, and one of the group chats that I am on is Ani's family. We call it part of the fam. I only changed it. It was initially welcome to the fam with my name. Then at some point I said, now I'm part of the family, so let's change the name. So it's part of the fam. And this afternoon, I wanted to send a private message to Ani. Nothing wrong with it, but I wanted to send a private. By mistake, I sent it on part of the fam. And then I wanted to delete it quickly. And then I was like, oh, how foolish of me to send it on that part of the fam group. This is why I hate to be on these group chats. I should leave all these. I already started thinking of leaving all the group chats now with this one thing. And nothing wrong, nothing extreme, nothing. I didn't make some mistake or anything like that, right? See, now he'll be thinking I should never bring my cell phone to the youth group again. And these kind of things. Sometimes you're extremists. So, these kind of things, so like when things happen to us, things where you feel like God is not with you, or He's deserted you, or He's abandoned you, you suddenly retract into this shell. Remember this character Daniel, who was so bold, who was so courageous. So don't go back. I remember this one swimmer. I went to him and asked him. He's a famous swimmer. I didn't know who he was, but when I went and asked him for his autograph, he wrote in my autograph book. This was when I was a kid. I said, dream big with Jesus. Those words are etched in my mind. You can dream big with Jesus because, and I like this. This gives us some perspective. Okay, so if you want to travel to the moon is about. I've written it down here. I want to get it right. Moon is about 384,000 kilometers from the Earth. Now, if you want to walk there to the moon, if there was a bridge to the moon, imagine it will take you 27 years if you walk 38 kilometers a day. That's just 4 kilometers short of a marathon. So every day, if you walk 38 kilometers, it will take you 27 kilometers to get to the moon walking. Now imagine you can travel at the speed of light, and the speed of light is 3 lakh kilometers per second, not per hour. Per second, 3 lakh kilometers. That's why when you put on the light, you see it immediately because the speed of light travels that fast. If you could travel at the speed of light, from the Earth to the moon, it will take you 1.5 seconds. You can be, from the Earth to the moon, you can be transported in 1.5 seconds. Now, you want to go to Venus, 2 minutes, 18 seconds. You want to go to Mercury, 4.5 minutes. You want to go to Jupiter, 35 minutes it takes. Now, if you want to go and you want to see the universe in which you live in, which is called the Milky Way, if you want to go from one end of the Milky Way to the other end, it will take you 100,000 years, even traveling at the speed of light, which is 3 lakh kilometers per second. And you know what? There are billions of galaxies. The Milky Way is just one galaxy. We're told there are billions of galaxies. And so, there are two verses I think of. Okay, two verses, you don't have to turn there. One is in Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40, it says that God holds the oceans in the palm of his hands. Just imagine, get that picture. Okay, God holds the ocean in the palm of his hands, and he measures the expanse of the universe. I just gave you a little perspective about how vast the universe is, how gigantic, how enormous it is. He measures the universe with the span of his fingers. So the span of our fingers, the distance between my thumb and my index finger. It's index finger, right? So from here to here, that's the span of. So he says he measures the universe with the span of finger. So that is giving us some perspective by Isaiah chapter 40. Deuteronomy chapter 33 says, underneath you and me are the everlasting arms. So underneath you and me is the everlasting arms of God, provided you're a believer in Jesus. So that tells you about his power and what he can accomplish through you, through me, if we submit our lives to him. So I should have a FOMO, fear of missing out on God's best for me, not the other way. Like, hey, the world has so much to offer and I'm missing out if I don't. When will I ever experience it? And then you look at other people, say they all nicely enjoy it and all, but I have to abstain, I have to refrain from. You'll miss out on God's best for you. And I would say that, one of my biggest struggles is explain when youngsters tell me that I also want to experience that once in my life. It's like I can relate, but I see the deception behind it at the same time. I can relate to what they're saying when they say, I want to experience this. I understand what they mean. They think that indulge a little bit, experiment a little bit, and then we'll come out and but if we don't experience something, I want to live a little, they say. I understand that. But today I see the deception behind it, and some of those choices have very costly ramifications or consequences. So if you give your life to God because of how powerful he is, you will feel very satisfied in him. As the one man who says, John Piper, he says, God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in him. I love that saying. God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in him. And he introduced this concept called Christian hedonism, which sounds like an oxymoron on the surface, because hedonism has this negative connotation, because hedonism is a concept of the world where everybody is seeking after their own pleasure. But then what is Christian hedonism? It's finding my pleasure in Jesus, finding my pleasure in God. At his right hand there are pleasures forevermore. So he's a pleasurable God, and so you have to find our pleasure in him. So we'll move on to the next verse. So two verses. First is expect the unexpected. These people were taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar. So verses 3 to 7 I'll read now. Or can somebody read it for me? Verses 3 to verses 6. 3, 4, 5, 6. Daniel chapter 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. Somebody can read.
And the king spoke unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he
should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
Thank you. So verses 3, 4, 5 and 6, the world demands conformity. The world around us, it demands us to be conformed to it. I don't know if you remember the J.B. Phillips translation. So here's a reminder. His translation of Romans 12:2, I like it. We all say, don't be conformed to the patterns of the world. He says, don't allow the world to squeeze you into its mold. Don't allow the world to beat you into its mold. And so the world around you demands conformity. Everybody wants you to conform. Everybody wants you to follow what they're doing. So Nebu wants to turn these captives into Chaldeans or Chaldeans or however it's pronounced. Okay, so he wants these people that he's taken captive from Judah to become like his own people, the Chaldeans. So there's this process, this 3-step approach, if you will, which he puts them through in order to change them and to become more like his own people. So the first thing you realize is he isolates them. The first step that he takes is he captures them, he brings them out of their own hometowns, from their own homeland, ways that they would be so familiar, streets that they would be familiar with, shops that they would be familiar with. He brings them out of there to a foreign land. The first thing that often happens is isolation, where you come out of things that you're ways that you're familiar with, or places or people that you're familiar with. I remember Veerapan, when he captured this guy Rajkumar, okay, do you all remember that Veerapan? You know Veerapan, right?
Yes.
So Veerapan, he's dead now, but he was one of those, people used to call him like a Robin Hood, but he was not a good guy, okay. He used to kill elephants, he used to remove the tusks, and he used to make sandalwood and all. And there's no way for an elephant to survive if you remove the tusks. It will bleed to death or be in so much pain that it will die unless it gets immediate medical attention. But anyway, so he would leave the elephant for dead, and he would do a lot of these things. But some people liked him. Some of the villages that he stayed around supported him because he would support them, and they never revealed his whereabouts. Now Veerapan, one time when I was, I think maybe 3rd, 4th standard in school, kidnapped this famous Kannada actor called Rajkumar. His son recently died, Puneeth Rajkumar. So he kidnaps this guy, and he is asking for this huge ransom. And he takes him into the thick jungles of Tamil Nadu. Okay, so you can't see using helicopter, even radars and all. Very ineffective. And this was good 20-25 years ago. So he's asking for this huge amount of money, huge ransom. Now, when he took Rajkumar, he kidnapped him from a farmhouse and he blinded him. He blinded him means he put a blindfold on him so that he doesn't know where he's going. And when a negotiator went, one of Veerapan, he knew Veerapan. When a negotiator went, they picked him up in this common point and they put a blindfold around him as well. Why? They don't want them to know the directions. They don't want them. They want the people that they're taking to their place where they're residing to be completely unfamiliar with. That's what they do. This is what happens, and I'm using that example to tell you what happens when we are also isolated from our surroundings. For maybe you grew up in Sunday school, you grew up in VBS, grew up in the church, but you know what place I consider isolation when you go to college, when I go to college. That's a place of isolation where you're spending 6-7 hours in the world. So it's the world. It's what's considered the world, the cosmos or the world system, the ways of the world. I mean, their thinking and everything is very evident in a place like a college, or even towards the end of your high school life. For me, it would have been about 7th, 8th standard where I started experiencing. For hours on end, I was in the world, so to speak. I've come out of this familiar surrounding like my house. See, when I was younger, none of that was happening because we never thought so much. We never started discussing the things of the world. We were still young. It was all about small mischievous things we used to do, but nothing vulgar, nothing dirty. But after you cross a certain age, when you mature, you start discussing other stuff. Then you talk about smoking, you talk about drinking, then you talk about whacking money from the house. Let's go here, let's go there, let's go bowling. All these different things come into play, and you're in the world basically, exposed to the world around you and everything that it has to offer. So the first thing is isolation, that we have to be careful. And I would just say that even now, because Jesus said, and that's where John 15 is where it comes from. He says, you're in the world, but you're not of the world. We're all in the world. We have to live in the world. You can't avoid everybody, or you can't avoid all the people. You're in the world, but you're not of it. So there must be a clear line when it comes to, even during these times when we feel like we are isolated. If you feel like you're isolated, then you must come back. There are times without choice, it's not your choice. You have to be isolated. You're in the world. But you have to come back to those people that you're familiar with. You have to have fellowship with the Christians. You have to walk in love. You have to rely on the Holy Spirit. You have to worship the Lord. And we often do that on Sundays over here. Every Sunday we come here for a time of, just recharging our spiritual batteries. The second thing is indoctrination. If you notice in verses, verses 4, he calls out these people. He tells this guy, Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring out these people, youths without blemish, of good appearance, skillful. And then he says, start teaching them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans or the Chaldeans. So there's this indoctrination, there's this brainwashing that's happening. And again, this is something I see in the world also, where your friends put this, we call it peer pressure, where the friends say, oh, you've not, either whether it's you don't have a girlfriend, not lost your virginity, you make, like I said earlier, you make some inappropriate jokes or something, and if you don't laugh, you're the weirdo, like don't make those jokes there or something. So you start feeling a little bit awkward. So there's this indoctrination. So you want to blend in again, and you accept all the thoughts or all the ideas that they're sharing with you. So I remember there was this one guy, again, the same guy who started that trend of the glasses. I remember when he came, he was a little bit older than me. So he was trying to tell me, like, it's very cool to, sleep around with girls. It's very cool to drink. It's very cool to smoke. He made it seem like that. He had a way with his words. He was a smooth talker. So you start getting indoctrinated at that young age, that age where you're able to absorb. It's such an impressionable age, and you feel like, oh, I'm missing out on the world. And so some people tend to indoctrinate you, but in the wrong way. So that's another way. So first you're isolated, then you're indoctrinated. We see all these things happening over here. So again, this happens in college. And then he talks about also the food that is offered. They got food, royal food. Might have been a little intimidating because that food was offered to the pagan deities. They were first offered to the pagan deities and then given to Daniel and all his friends and everything. So maybe they were intimidated because they've never experienced this, and they're worshipping the pagan gods over there. This is Nebuchadnezzar who owned one of the wonders of the world. The hanging gardens were in his palace. The hanging gardens were there, and he had a hydraulic system. The Euphrates River flowed right through the city. There was a hydraulic pump back in the day, imagine, hydraulic pump coming and watering his garden. And his wife, just to remind his wife basically, because he brought her out of the mountains, to remind her that, this is like her home. He created all this beautiful gardens, So there might have been this intimidation. There they come out and they, like, from their little town, they come and see this huge, massive city, hustling, bustling city. It might have been intimidating for them, and maybe they started thinking also, maybe our God, like we were in a little town, we used to eat this kind of food. Now look at all the food that we're getting, this royal food. Maybe our God won't mind, or maybe our God is not the real God. So so those kind of things. There's a crisis that they're having, and the last thing that you realize over there is he's trying to mess with their identity. If you realize what happens, verses 6. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And then in verse 7, what happens? And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. So Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. So he's trying to change their identity over here. Now I know that our friends don't just change our name in our birth certificate, but they give us, if you have noticed now in our own way, like I remember when I was growing up, one of the many names I was given, pet names or nicknames by friends. One of the names was Wheelie Johnny, okay, because my name is Abhishek Jonathan. So Wheelie Johnny, because I used to pop wheelies on my bike. So Wheelie Johnny they used to call. Now it is in and of itself, it's not a bad thing, you see. But because of that name, everybody called me, I felt even more pressure to pull off deadly wheelies. 2-3 times I felt. And you see how all this works, the identity. Calling me Wheelie Johnny is playing my mind. Now I have to be really good. My name is Wheelie Johnny. I have to pop nice wheelies. 2-3 times I fell down like this and hurt myself, these kind of things. So just to tell you how identity also, can what people call you. So there were some other derogatory names like Blackie, late reaction, these kinds. Because late reaction is like I won't react. Somebody tells a joke, I just then I be like, oh, I got it. So late reaction. So these kind of things play on your mind, identity, and even like so all these. You know what? Even in the mob, even when you join a gang. And I know that none of you intend on joining a gang, but this is exactly what they do to the new members who come. This process over here happens in so many gangs. They'll change your identity, they change your name, they'll give you fresh food to eat. I mean, different kind of food, and of course the language, the lingo also changes. The way you talk, you have these slang words used at certain tone, intonation. All that changes when you join a gang. So this is a process where Nebuchadnezzar is trying to change these young men. Now comes verse 8, and this is like the theme verse of the entire book. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. So he resolved. So, the third thing that I want to share with you, and we'll end with this, that non-conformity begins from within, or courage begins from within. You need to be determined. You need to make a decision. You need to purpose in your heart. I'm not going to cross the line. I'm not going to do it. Yes, everybody. That's why we just sang, though none go with me. That's why I was really particular to bring the third verse. We are almost stopping and things like, though none go with me, still I will follow. None may go with you when it comes to following Jesus, at least in your circle. There'll always be Jesus followers. Okay, you can always find them. But maybe sometimes you're in certain places, certain cities, certain crowds where none go with you. There you have to be a non-conformist. Yeah, and here he was basically, imagine how intimidating it would have been. 15 to 17 years old, young boy. It's scary. I mean, the king calls them out. He's like, for 3 years, just like an undergrad degree, 3 years, he's indoctrinating them, teaching them the language, the literature, changing their names, giving them food. So much of control, so much of manipulation, so much of brainwashing that's happening over here. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. He's not going to indulge in any of those things. He draws a clear line in the sand and he says, I'm not going to cross over that line. I think the reason is because the pressure inside of him from God, and it's a good pressure, sometimes pressure is good. The pressure inside of him from the Holy Spirit was greater than the pressure on the outside world, and that's how it should be. Some weeks ago, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, I was standing here and I was talking about a vessel that I could not open. Okay, that thought just came into my mind, and then I was struggling to make a point in the sermon, and I just ended it abruptly. But the point is, the vessel, some of you remember, you all were here. So the maid, just to give, if you are not here, one of the maid in our house, the cook in our house, she made some cauliflower or something, and it was very hot. And we locked it, and so tightly, hot case, so tightly that when I came to open it, I wasn't able to open it. She tried, I tried, my sister tried. We tried with a cloth, and then I brought a spanner to try to get some leverage on it. None of it worked, and we were trying the whole day. That was why was it? Because the pressure exerted on the outside did not have any match. There was no match for the pressure on the inside. That didn't allow. So likewise, I'm using that again to state how the world will try to pressure you from the outside. The devil, the world, they'll say, give in, come join us, do this. But if the pressure inside of you is greater, the Holy Spirit inside of you is greater, you will not open up to the things of the world. You will remain. One John? Yeah, what does it say? In me, hallelujah, amen. Yes, Sean, thank you for reminding us. Then he that is in the world. That's true. So, I end with this. and this is not original with me, okay, I got it from somewhere. So, are you a thermometer or a thermostat? A thermometer or a thermostat? A thermometer is something, if I put a thermometer in my mouth or under my here in my armpit, that's how some people check the temperature, right? I prefer the tongue method. But anyways, if you do it, it will the mercury inside or whatever the chemical, it will drop to the temperature matching your temperature. So are you going to be a thermometer when it comes to the world? When they do something, are you going to match them? You're going to be a thermostat. What is a thermostat? A thermostat is shows the temperature. You set the temperature in a room, and then doesn't matter what the temperature is in the room, it will match the temperature on the thermostat. So are you going to be a thermostat in that you have your own standard and you influence the world around you, the atmosphere around you, so to speak, like the people around you. You say, no, I'm not going to compromise. My temperature is set at such and such. You want to come follow me, that's okay. You start influencing. Because that's what happens here. Because Daniel purposed in his heart, you start seeing that God rewards him. He says, I cannot eat any of that food. And he says, give me and my friends only vegetables. And he says, test us for 10 days. And the guy tested just vegetables. Their faces were glowing more than everybody else was having the royal food from the best caterers, from the best chefs and all that. So God rewards that kind of faith, that kind of determination in the heart, where you purpose in your heart and say, I'm not going to indulge in the ways of the world. There's definitely a rewards. And of course, if you read the book of Daniel, he stays. Many people he's thrown in the den. You all know that. It's a Sunday school story. But he stays put where he is. God uses him for 70 years straight. Kings come and go. Proverbs chapter 21 says, the heart of the king is in the hand of God. And like the courses of water, he turns it wherever he wishes. So even if it's a powerful person above you, sometimes we're intimidated by certain people above us. Whether it's politicians or whether it's even like people in our immediate circle who's trying to exert this force, this influence over us. And the pressure is to conform to their ways, and you say, oh, I don't want to offend them, I have to be careful, and I'll just laugh it off, it's better, not to rub them the wrong way and all those things. But look at Daniel, young guy, stands out, he's different, even with the king. It must have been intimidating with the king above him like that. He would have been wondering, and you saw some of the hardships, some of the hardships that he goes through. But he stays put, he sticks to his decisions, he purposed in his heart, and God rewarded him for that.